Every traitor to the Imperium has his or her own reasons for turning away from the Emperor's light. For some, the appeal and temptation of chaos is simply irresistible, whilst for others it may be a desperate act of survival against a hostile foe such as the Tau Empire. In many cases, however, it is disillusionment with the Imperium as opposed to outside influences that can cause the fall of a person or group, as evidenced in the Badab War. Amongst the Adeptus Astartes, any traitors almost universally fall into the embrace of chaos, whether willingly like many traitor legions or not like the Crimson Slaughter. Note the almost, for there is at least one group of renegades who serve neither chaos nor the Imperium. If anything, they hate the ruinous powers more than the empire they abandoned. Originally believed to be descendants of Rogel Dawn, this second founding chapter is now practically, if not totally, extinct, but in death these supposed renegades were able to find redemption in the Imperium's eyes, an honour so rarely given as to be pretty much unheard of. Led into their final days, and potentially still, by the librarian come chapter master Sarpedon, they are the Soul Drinkers, and this is their story. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. The Soul Drinkers are a second founding chapter, and thus were in the first wave of new chapters following the adoption of the Codex Astartes. Throughout their history, it has always been believed that they were descended from the Imperial Fists, although in recent times, this has been called into question. Examinations from the apothecaries of the Angels Sanguine, conducted to see if there was any corruption in it that could lead to the chapter's fall, concluded that Rogel Dawn was in fact not their Primarch, but who the true Primarch would be is unclear. We'll see if any evidence crops up as we go along that may provide an answer. We cannot be sure who the original chapter master was, unfortunately, nor do we know any notable Soul Drinkers from that time. In fact, the first time the chapter shows up in the annals of history was during the War of the Beast in M32, when the Imperial Fist activated what is known as the Last Wall Protocol. This protocol was only to be activated if Terra itself was under grave threat, and was essentially the Imperial Fist temporarily reforming the Legion, as 6 successors and the parent chapter would combine under a single command. While some, such as the Black Templars and Fist's Exemplar, were less than keen on it, the chapters combined to try and hold off the Beast and his mighty War. The Soul Drinkers were at this time led by Euclidius, though whether he was the original is, as I said before, unknown, who eventually rose to command a third of Terra's fleets, but was lost before the final assault on Ulanor, which, if you didn't know, is actually Armageddon. The Mechanicus teleported away, rather than Exterminatus at the end of the war. Before this last push, however, the Soul Drinkers gave up a portion of their strength to re-establish the Imperial Fist after the parent chapter was almost if not totally wiped out in the war, so on top of their likely heavy losses, their numbers probably got pretty damn low. Assuming equal contributions, they'll have given over 160 Marines to the Fists. Once it was all over, the Last Wall Protocol was no longer necessary and the chapters went their separate ways. The Soul Drinkers assumedly rebuilt back up to full strength before going back on campaign. They were actually fleet-based at this time, having never been known to possess a homeworld, and so would also qualify as a crusading chapter, like the Black Templars. Unfortunately, their tale goes rather quiet from this point until very recent times. Whilst there are no exact dates, the appearance of one particular individual gives us a slightly rough time frame. We know of one individual from the Soul Drinkers during these interluding millennia, Argarath, a chapter master in M36, but his and the chapter's feats in those days are lost to history. There is another, but as his story intertwines with what comes later, we shall address him when he becomes a little more relevant. The exile of the Soul Drinkers from the Imperium took place sometime in late M41, and was all set up by a demon prince of Tzeentch, Abraxas, otherwise known as the Architect of Fate. I thought that was Tzeentch's or somebody else's nickname, but never mind, I guess I got my wires crossed. The demon guided unwitting humans to study a device known as the Soul Spear, an arcane device supposedly wielded by Rogel Dawn during the Great Crusade. It had been entrusted to the Soul Drinkers after the second founding, but had subsequently been lost or stolen. Abraxas used one of the humans as a beacon of sorts, drawing the Soul Drinkers to come and reclaim their relic with a full 3 companies led by the librarian Sarpedon. The Astartes secured the orbital platform containing the Soul Spear with ease, but as they moved to secure the device itself, the Adeptus Mechanicus pretty much stole it from under their noses. When the Soul Drinkers demanded their relic back, the Mechanicus revealed a huge siege cannon hidden within their vessel, whilst passing on the Soul Spear for return to a forge world unknown. The Soul Drinkers did get it back later, though we're not sure when, we do know how. The Astartes were forced to board and destroy said vessel before they were blown out of the sky on the now fortified platform, and were hurriedly extracted by the rest of the chapter in the aftermath. When the Inquisition caught word of what transpired, which was seemingly pretty quickly, they cared not for the circumstances and only for the facts. The Soul Drinkers had attacked another Imperial faction, and thus the entire chapter was declared excommunicate traitores, traitor Astartes. Yet another example of the Imperial Inquisition's exemplary work, ladies, gentlemen, and Xenos of all ages. When Sarpedon and co got back to the main fleet, suffice it to say that the chapter master, Gorgolian, was beyond furious. He blamed Sarpedon for the whole affair, and the two fought for the fate of the chapter. Ritual dueling isn't stated as a chapter tradition, but it could well have been, which would justify this fight. Ordinarily, the librarian would have never defeated the chapter master, but it seems that either Abraxas or another chaotic party had taken a vested interest in ensuring the outcome went his way, as Sarpedon broke out in massive mutations, seemingly at random. With this extra advantage, Sarpedon defeated and presumably slew Gorgolian, becoming the new chapter master, but not everybody was on board. Presumably due to his mutations, many of the novices and others within the Soul Drinkers refused to acknowledge their new leader, whilst the specialists, who presumably knew him better, stood with Sarpedon. This caused a rift in the Soul Drinkers and sparked the First Chapter War, a civil war taking place over several months that eventually saw Sarpedon and his forces triumphant. Despite now being the undisputed leader of the Soul Drinkers, Sarpedon still had a major problem. The entire chapter was now officially considered traitors to the Imperium. The whole affair had left him disillusioned with the Imperium, but he and his brothers were not servants to chaos, and they would stay that way. The official stance of the Soul Drinkers became that the Imperium had betrayed the Emperor's vision and standpoint, which, somewhat ironically, is far closer to the truth than even they knew, and so the renegades would continue to serve the Emperor even if his empire had cast them aside. Unfortunately, Abraxas did not appear to have finished with the Soul Drinkers, presumably because they still clung to their loyalty, and the demon masqueraded as an aspect of the Emperor in order to guide them as he saw fit. Sarpedon and co followed him as expected, moving their fleet to a space hulk they christened the Broken Back, though what ships remained from the original fleet is actually unknown. Guided by Abraxas, they were encouraged to defeat the Nurgle demon prince Vermeth, who supposedly took the form of a virus infecting innocents, implying that the Soul Drinkers were not led into the Eye of Terror or to a demon world, but instead stayed in real space. Vermeth was, incidentally, a rival of Abraxas, which is why the Tzeentchian prince had demanded his death, and the Soul Drinkers obliged. Rather than continue his charade, Abraxas chose this moment, the death of Vermeth, to reveal himself and his true nature to Sarpedon and his sons. He offered them a place at his side as his chosen warband of Chaos Marines, and even attempted to sweeten the deal by handing over the Soul Spear. Don't ask when or where he got it, I honestly don't know. But to his probable surprise, especially given the power they knew he could grant them with Sarpedon's mutations, the Soul Drinkers refused to follow the Demon Prince. A battle erupted between the Astartes and Abraxas' demonic host, and in a twist so ironic for the Architect of Fate himself, Sarpedon struck Abraxas down with the Soul Spear he just handed over, killing his physical form. Their destiny now firmly in their own hands, with their supposed guide banished, the Soul Drinkers moved on, and the Chapter Master had a very specific goal in mind. Even though they had been in unwitting service to a demon, the Soul Drinkers still possessed a burning hatred for chaos stronger than even their hatred for the Imperium. As a result, Sarpedon wished to get rid of the mutations that had afflicted him, and he believed he had potentially found technology capable of helping him. The Soul Drinkers had once fought on the planet of Stratix Lumini, a world that contained scientific research facilities that Sarpedon saw as the best hope for curing his arachnid-like mutation. Perhaps unfortunately, the world was no longer in Imperial hands. The Tesseract, a creation of the Adeptus Mechanicus on Stratix Lumini itself, had taken over the planet and much of the region with the aid of an army of undead he himself had raised. Mechanicus members were scattered across this area, and the Soul Drinkers attempted to gather them as they would assumedly be needed to operate any technology, dodging the forces of both the Tesseract and the Inquisition who were seeking them out in turn. The Inquisitorial force was led by an Inquisitor Thaddeus, and eventually the three armies converged on Stratix Lumini itself. The Tesseract was probably powerful enough to beat both the Soul Drinkers and the Inquisition individually, but an unlikely alliance between Sarpedon and Thaddeus saw the life form destroyed. The Librarian stunned the creature with his psychic powers, allowing the Inquisitor to kill his body before Sarpedon extinguished his soul. The Soul Drinkers fled following the Tesseract's defeat, knowing their fate were they to remain around the Inquisition any longer, but it appears as though Thaddeus came to see that the Renegades were not truly traitors. Whether he let them go willingly is unclear, but there's no known conflict between the two. This of course meant Sarpedon was still afflicted by his mutation, having not had chance to explore the research of Stratix Lumini, but somehow a few squads under the command of Assault Sergeant Telos had been left behind. Talos had been part of the force that had almost retrieved the Soul Spear all that time ago, and had also begun to suffer mutations that were second in severity only to Sarpedon himself. Somehow, his forces were not overrun by the Tetrarch's vast army before the final defeat of the Mechanicus' creation, and within a few years of their abandonment, they had cleansed the entirety of Stratus Luminae of life and sworn allegiance to Khorne, the Blood God. When he received word of his sergeant's fall, Sarpedon's reaction was simple. He was a heretic, and he had to die. Sarpedon and the Soul Drinkers hunted down Telos and his now Khornate forces, eventually finding them on the world of Antimian IV. This world had once been imperial, but had fallen into the hands of an alliance of a Slaneshi cult and Dark Eldar, which confuses me to no end, with imperial forces led by the Crimson Fists trying to take it back. The Crimson Fists actually found Telos and co first, prompting them to summon more reinforcements on the correct, but for the wrong reasons, belief that all of the Soul Drinkers were present. They would be in due course. It would appear that this larger Fist force clashed with Sarpedon's contingent, and though the Soul Drinkers were the ones to retreat, they claimed their fellow Sons of Dawn's company standard in the process. The Dark Eldar used their armies to block the Loyalist pursuit, and they and Sarpedon came to form an alliance that both planned to betray. Using their main forces to aid the Xenos against the Imperial Guard, the Soul Drinker scouts were sent to find Telos. They did so, and thanks to the aid of their chaplain, they were able to stall the Khornate contingent until Sarpedon could arrive and battle his mutated brother. The Chaptermaster was victorious, but only barely, and rather than be killed, Telos was simply trapped beneath a collapsed bridge. The Soul Drinkers also got one over on the Dark Eldar, as the Xenos entered the final stage of their plan to convert Antimian IV into a demon world. The Renegades were able to lure the Crimson Fist into an all-out assault on the Dark Eldar stronghold, destroying it and interrupting the ritual partway through. Unfortunately, this still left the planet completely unsalvageable, and thus it was subjected to exterminatus, which had the side effect of killing off Telos too. Assumedly, the Soul Drinkers had withdrawn before this happened, though it's not stated their fleet clashed with the Crimson Fists on the way out. Maybe they did it during the final assault, believing their task to be done, I don't know. Sometime after this, Sarpedon found his leadership under threat from within, which actually led to a second civil war within the Soul Drinkers. The chapter had been recruiting during their exile to keep numbers up, and one of these new recruits had decided he didn't like the approach the mutated librarian was taking. His name was Eumenes, a sergeant who wished the Astronomicon to be extinguished to remake the Imperium anew. This would almost certainly require the death of the Emperor, which of course Sarpedon was not planning to do, given it was the Lord of Mankind he still swore fealty to. This came to a head during a battle on the jungle world of Vankalis, which Sarpedon had chosen to defend from an Orc invasion whilst gathering supplies for the Broken Back. Eumenes had remained with the Space Hulk and initiated a coup, which elements of both the land and space-bound forces got involved with. This traitor contingent on the ground were actually spectators as the Howling Griffins engaged Sarpedon and co., honouring a long-time debt to protect Vankalis. The now out-of-favour Inquisitor Thaddeus was with them, and after he killed a Loyalist to escape and warned the Soul Drinkers of the Griffins' coming, he was killed by the Loyalist commander Librarian Merseno. Now cut off on Vankalis with the fleet in Eumenes' hands, Sarpedon handed mastery of the chapter over to the sergeant and joined up with his traitorous brothers. The now sort of reunified Soul Drinkers had not even got away from Vankalis when they next came under attack from the Howling Griffins. The Loyalists attempted boarding actions against the Renegades, with Sarpedon and Librarian Merseno being something of the title fight in the engagement. The two were pretty evenly matched and both extremely powerful. By the end of it, they were both exhausted from psychic exertion. This allowed Eumenes to kill Merseno easily, taking his signature force axe for himself, though I doubt he could use it as anything other than a standard power axe due to not probably being psychic himself. The new chaptermaster also exploited Sarpedon's weakness, arresting him and locking him away in the brig of the Broken Back. This couldn't hold the librarian for long, however, as he exploited the latent psychic potential hidden within a scout to bust himself out and come looking for vengeance. What followed was something of a repeat of Sarpedon's original duel for the chapter just after their exile, but with a much clearer result. Even though Eumenes wielded both Merseno's axe and the Soul Spear, Sarpedon struck him down and reclaimed mastery of the Soul Drinkers before bidding them flee from Vankalis. This hasty withdrawal seemingly meant they had not recovered the salvage they originally wanted from the jungle world, and by the time they next encountered the human world, they were low on fuel. Further compounding the issue was the fact that Necrons were systematically cleansing the region they had fled to. The humans only held a single planet by the time the Soul Drinkers arrived. Buying time for the settlers to escape in exchange for fuel, the arrival of a Necron fleet would have ensured the chapter's extermination had the Adeptus Mechanicus not seemingly arrived in pursuit soon after. Even the forces of the Omnis Sire were not truly enough to turn the tide, and so the Mechanicus and Soul Drinkers allied in order to kill the Necron Lord orchestrating everything. Given what I've seen with Necrons, I'm not sure if this was truly enough to defeat them, or just buying time for their escape. They succeeded, though the senior tech marine of the chapter, Ligris, was forced to sacrifice himself to finally put the machine down after it reanimated. The Mechanicus and Soul Drinkers withdrew to their promised transports, but the Imperials had sold the Renegades out. Waiting was none other than First Captain Lysander of the Imperial Fist. His presence is the only reason I have any sense of timing for these events, by the way. Sarpedon tried to duel Lysander, but lost due to his exhaustion, and as he fell unconscious, he ordered his sons to surrender and prayed they'd listen. They did, and the Soul Drinkers were brought to the Phalanx, the de facto home of the Imperial Fists. Officially, the chapter's homeworld is Terra, but they don't use it as such. Upon their arrest, one would expect the Soul Drinkers would have a lot of questions to answer, and those who were cynical toward the Imperium would likely anticipate that execution would not be far behind. It was during this trial period that the doubt regarding their primogenitor that we mentioned at the beginning was first raised. However, whilst we do not know for sure how long any interrogations went on, nor do we know if any knowledge was truly gleaned from them, the Renegades were saved from potential death. Well, at least at the hands of their fellow Sons of Dawn. Amongst the Soul Drinkers aboard the Phalanx was Daniathos, apologies for potential pronunciation issues, the only known dreadnought of the chapter who had written something known as the Catechisms Martial. Daniathos was a philosopher and Astartes both, and the Catechisms form the basis of Soul Drinker doctrine. They're rather long when put together, but excerpts include, "What is the greatest failure which we must guard? The failure to die when death would serve the Emperor's purpose." Or, "How can we know the battle is won? Know only this, there is but a single battle, and it will never be won." Cheery, eh? Regardless of this, it would be fair to say that Daniathos would hold a fair amount of sway within the Soul Drinkers, but for unknown reasons, he'd not been alongside Sarpedon. Details as to his true location are actually unclear. Instead, he'd been using the chaplaincy as his agents as he planned his own scheme, letting a new Imperium rise from the ashes of the old by unleashing a mighty demon to usher it all in. Daniathos opened a warp gate known as the Predator's Eye to unleash the demon, which, by coincidence, if such a thing is possible with Tzeentch, was actually Abraxas. What's less clear is whether the gate already existed within the Phalanx or was opened via device or ritual. I suspect the latter, though. However, even now the Soul Drinkers under Sarpedon refused to fall, and they stood side by side with the Imperial Fists as they defended the Phalanx. Eventually, the armies of Abraxas were defeated once again, and the warp gate was pretty much sealed, but the cost was massive. The losses for the Imperial Fists are unknown, but only 4 Soul Drinkers were left alive. Sarpedon, Daniathos, as a prisoner after his dreadnought was destroyed, don't ask, I don't know how he didn't die either, and 2 captains, Luco and Gravis. Rather than stick around, or anything logical like that, the remaining 3 loyalist Soul Drinkers chose willingly to walk into the Predator's Eye, dragging the traitorous Daniathos with them. To this day, I am baffled as to why they would do so, especially given what the Fist did in response. Now believing their supposedly renegade brothers were truly loyal to the Emperor, the names of the Soul Drinkers were inscribed on a column within the Phalanx itself by the Sons of Dawn in honour of their loyalty and sacrifice. The Soul Drinkers now are listed officially as extinct, but the fates of Sarpedon and the other 3 survivors on the Battle of the Phalanx are actually unknown. I do suspect, however, that even if they live, they'll not be showing their faces again. So end the tale of the Soul Drinkers. Despite the Imperium declaring them traitors, despite the influences of chaos within and without, this chapter stood loyal to the Emperor right until the bitter end. Whilst the actions that led to the excommunication are questionable on both sides, one cannot deny that Sarpedon and his brothers made the best of a bad situation, and even managed to convince those that they supposedly abandoned of their true intentions. Given the legendary tenacity and stubbornness of the Imperial Fists, this is something that can only really be commended. If all Space Marines showed the same devotion to the Emperor as the Soul Drinkers, history may have been very different indeed, and I'm glad to have told their story. For now, though, we cannot think of what might have been, but must instead look at the truth of history. Next time, we'll be looking at a legion who were the most powerful of all in the earliest days of the Great Crusade, but whose history is shadowed by an event that haunts them even to this day. Thank you all for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.